everybody, I'm back. Today we're going to finish my nails and finish up the Tripod Trilogy. If you're new here, welcome to the Nail Coven. Sometimes while I do my nails, I talk about the latest book I've read. Today is a continuation of the book The Pool of Fire, which is part of the Tripod Trilogy. We've been discussing these books for a while, and this is the last book in the series. So, very excited to get to the end and find out what happens. I'm also going to be finishing up the nail art on my nails. I am going to be doing some flame nails for the Pool of Fire. I've already put down the base colors on here, and I'm just going to be painting on the flames now. So when we left our story last, our troop of the boys have been training to attack the city of the tripods. They have discovered that alcohol, specifically schnapps, can paralyze the masters. They can't detect it. So they're going to put it into the water supply. So Will and his troop, which is headed by Fritz, descend onto the city in the middle of the night. They have on scuba gear and they are entering the city through the vents in the river that enters the city. They pop up in an underground pool and immediately they can feel the heaviness of the gravity in the city. They take off their scuba gear. They already have the masks on that they need to breathe in the city under their scuba gear. They take off the scuba gear and they sink it in the pool that they just came up through, knowing that it will get out of the city as debris. They also had brought some items with them for the distillation process. Will and Fritz know of an empty storehouse from having been in the city before. So they decide that this is where they will be making the schnapps at, because they don't suspect that, any masters will be coming around, since none of them use this warehouse for anything. And this warehouse is also about 100 yards or so away from the water treatment plant. It's also near one of the larger pyramids where there's a communal area for slaves. They feel like they can be pretty inconspicuous here, coming and going. There's a lot of slaves coming and going, and they just don't think they'll really be noticed. This is where they will eat and sleep and change the filter in their masks. So over time, they will be building up their supply of schnapps. They're working to a schedule so that they'll be able to coordinate with all the other cities and put the schnapps in the water supply all at the same time, so that there won't be time for them to communicate with each other and warn each other. So the day comes when the coordinated attack is to be. And they have to attack their water treatment plant at midday in order to be synchronized with the other two cities. Now, during the day, the water treatment plant is manned by 3 masters. This means that they're basically going to have to attack these masters in order to get access to the area where they need to put in the schnapps. So they hide near the entrance of the water treatment plant and wait for just the right time to attack. Now, since all the masters are extremely strong, there's no way each one of them can take on one master. Now, there's 6 of them and there's 3 or 4 working. They can group together and try to take on one at a time, hopefully. When the time's right, Fritz yells, "Now!" And they all go down the ramp into the water treatment plant. There's a master standing there, and he's like, what are you doing here? You have some errand here? They say, yes, we have a message for you. A message? What message? And then all at once, they all lunge for this master. Fritz hits him right in the vulnerable spot, and he screams and he falls down. And then another master like comes back out from behind a machine, and he's like, what's going on here? And they're like, we don't know. There's something wrong with the master. We don't know what to do. And because the masters are so confident in their caps controlling the slaves, he doesn't even think that they could be tricking him. So he comes and he kind of bends down to examine the master that's on the ground. And with that, they hit him again in the weak spot. And this one doesn't even let out a cry. He just immediately falls over. So they drag these two masters, behind a machine to hide them. And then I think there's one other master that they have to attack. And so they drag all the masters that they had to attack back behind these machines. Then they get to work putting the schnapps into the water supply. Now they're all pouring these jars of schnapps into the water supply, and then all of a sudden Will feels a tentacle around his waist, and he knows that a master has walked in on what they were doing. And he's like, what are you guys doing? Again, not even suspecting that they could be up to something nefarious, because I mean, they're under complete control. So he walks right up to them. So this master is like holding Will with one tentacle. Then the other boys run to attack him, but he just he throws one boy across the room. He goes flying and slams up against a big machine. He's holding the other two with his other tentacles. Then Will can feel like the constriction on his chest just getting, or around his waist, just, it's so painful. And he can see one of the boys grab a metal rock, and he's like getting positioned to throw it at the master. But then Will blacks out. When Will comes to, he sees all the others pouring the schnapps into the water supply. And Fritz notices that he's like kind of starting to wake up, goes to check on him, and he's like, are you okay? He goes, my ribs are killing me. He's like, but have we done it? And Fritz is like, yeah, I think we have. Will notices that this last master that had caught them was laid out, and some green ooze was coming out of the area where there was a big gash in his vulnerable spot. So it seems that this boy had thrown this rod into that area, and it just like instantly killed him. They finish putting the schnapps into the water supply. They drag this other master back behind a machine where the other dead masters are, and then they decide they have to put as much room as possible between them and this scene, because it will be discovered soon enough. But it will be too late, because the schnapps was already in the water supply and on its way to taps all over the city. So at the communal area, Fritz examines Will, and it seems like he has a fractured rib. So they take pieces of some masks that weren't being used, and they wrap his ribs in it. And Will says, you know, it still hurts, but it's better. So they wait about 30 minutes before they decide to leave the communal area. And they're starting to wonder, did this work? Like, everything seems normal. There's nothing else going on. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. And they're starting to like feel, you know, a little down because they think maybe it didn't work. But then all of a sudden, as they're passing a pyramid, they see a master come running out, and his tentacles are flailing and you can tell he's very distressed. And then all of a sudden, he just collapses and is completely motionless. So they walk around the city just to like observe what's going on, and more masters are starting to line the streets with their bodies. And they wonder, wonder what they must be thinking, because, they probably don't even suspect. How can you be defensive against something that you can't even comprehend would happen? Bodies are piling up, and the slaves are freaking out. Like, the masters are their whole reason for being alive. And here they are, all dying around them, or at least that's what they think. And they're crying, and the masters are no more, we have no purpose. And one of them's like, let's all go to the place of happy release, since, all of our masters are dead. And Fritz is like, oh my gosh, we can't let them all commit suicide. So he yells out, he's like, no. He's like, it's okay. They're just sleeping, and they're gonna need us when they wake up. And the slaves are like, how do you know this? And he says, my master told me that this was going to happen. And the slaves believe him because, slaves might lie to one another, but never about the masters. When it's become apparent that it's worked, they have to move on to the second part of their mission, which is destroying the city. They have to strike at the heart of the city while the masters are paralyzed. They have about 6 hours before they just start to begin to regain consciousness. They know where the power to the whole city is. They need to go there and they need to turn it off. So they get to that pyramid, they have to go down a ramp to where the machines are. They get down there and they're like, gosh, we don't know, they don't even know what they're looking at, right? Like all these machines and buttons and levers, and like they don't even know where to begin. But then they notice that there is a big pyramid in the center of this huge room. And there's a door. So they go into the door and they have to go through all these mazes of like smaller and smaller pyramids until they come to one. And they're like, oh, okay, this is it. This is obviously where we need to be, because there's these huge flames of fire coming up out of a pit. And across the room, there's a lever. And one of the troop members is like, oh, that's got to be it. And without even saying anything, he runs over to it, puts his hand on it, and immediately a big flame like engulfs him, and he's like instantly dead. So when he collapses to the floor, the weight of his hand on the lever pulls the lever down as well. Then the pit of flames goes out, like the flames come down and they die down. And they look down into the pit and there's nothing. It's just darkness. So you know that this whatever was powering this flame or whatever is off. Now it's pitch black and they feel like a small earthquake under their feet. So they have to kind of feel around to try to get back to the surface. So when they get to the surface, the slaves are obviously, their caps are not working anymore. They look confused and they see Will and Fritz and the other boys, and they ask, how do we get out of here? So obviously their caps aren't working anymore. So the boys tell them, okay, we need to get to the Hall of the Tripods, because that's where they had entered the city when they were taken from the games. So they figured that must be the way out. So they all head over there. And as they're heading over there, they're joined by more and more of the capped, but their caps don't work anymore. They get to the Hall of the Tripods and they go through the door. And they push the button to get through the door, and then they're like, oh, duh, we turned off the power. So it doesn't work. They can't get through. They try smashing the door with pieces of metal. it's pointless. Then it occurs to Will, oh crap, if there's no power to this door, then there's no power to any of the other doors. They can't get to food, water, place where they can change the filters in their masks. So they're either gonna starve to death or choke on the master's air that they can't breathe because they can't change the filters in their masks. So one of the cap that joined their party says that his master, his job was to work on the dome, the glass crystal dome that encases the city, and that he used to have to take him things while he was up there working. So he knows how to get up there. So maybe they can somehow, like, I don't know, maybe there's a way out up there, or they can break the glass and get through. So he shows them all where to go. There's a ledge that runs along the gold wall where it meets the crystal. So they're walking along this ledge looking for some sort of door or something. They come up to one, and it's like protruding from the crystal dome, like a continuation of the path that they're on. Now they go to open the door, and it's extremely difficult because obviously it was made for the masters who are much stronger than them. But there's like a wheel thing that you have to turn, no button. So they pull on it as hard as they can, and it is moving, but just very little. So they take turns pulling this wheel to one side, and then finally the door opens enough so that they can slide in. When they go through the door, there is a little room. There's a few doors. There's one that you could tell would continue to the other side of the room where the ledge would continue. But then there's one on the opposite side. It looks exactly like the one they just came through. It has the wheel. So they go to try to, and it obviously leads outside of the city. They go to turn it, it won't budge. They can't understand why. It's exactly like the other door. Why isn't this one opening? Then it dawns on one of them that this is probably some kind of airlock, right? So there's probably some sort of safety where if one door is open, the other one won't open. Everybody makes mistakes, even masters. Long story short, they are able to figure out that they can open the outside door if the inside door is closed. But they don't just want to try to get out. For one, the wall is so high, there's no way to get out right there anyway, because they'll all die trying to get down to the ground. But they still have to destroy the city. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to get both doors open so that the Earth's atmosphere enters the city of Golden Lead, and all the masters will suffocate because they can't breathe human air. So they keep the door that goes to the outside open. Then they try to open the other door that leads to the inside. They can't. The failsafe won't allow. So they have to try and knock it off its hinges. So it takes a long time, and they have to take turns, but they do it. And all of a sudden, there's a huge wind that comes. Will can feel like his clothes like pulling, like he's gonna get sucked out. They all hit the floor, and after a few minutes, it stops. Then they hear something else, like he describes it as the sky tearing. They look up, and there's a huge hole in the crystal dome, and it's starting to like crack and fall away, and huge shards of glass are falling down onto the city. They've accomplished that part of the mission. They've destroyed the city, but they still need to get out. So since all the masters are basically dead now that the Earth's atmosphere has gotten into their city, they need to turn the power back on so they can open a door back down to where the pit of fire is. Now they're afraid to touch the lever because they're afraid of dying, getting engulfed in fire. But they reason that maybe that happened because it was already on. Fritz volunteers to be the one to try to turn the lever back on. And he does. But nothing happens. He doesn't die, so that's good. But the pit doesn't reignite either. So they think they failed. they're thinking, okay, well, we'll just have to go out through the river again and hope that everyone is strong enough to make it. But they start to see little sparks coming up from the pit. And then eventually it's huge flame again. So the power's back on. So they go back to the hall of the tripods. They push the button and it works. And they get out of the city. And as they're running out, some of their party members come running up and they're like, you did it, yay. And they're like, well, but have we heard from the other two cities? And they said, we have. One has succeeded, the one in the east, but not the one in the west, the one in America, the one where Henry is. And Will is very worried about his friend. So a few months go by. Henry makes it back to their headquarters. He explains, that just had a lot of bad luck. Just nothing was going right. While they ended up being able to escape, they did not accomplish their mission. They're also wondering, why haven't the masters counterattacked yet? I mean, we destroyed 2 of their cities. They know we're, free of the caps, or at least some men are, and that they've declared war on the masters, so why aren't they attacking back? And they reason that they're kind of just deciding to just focus on defense of their last remaining city in America. And they're probably thinking that they just need to hold out for another year or so until the ships with the machines that are going to basically kill all human life on Earth show up, and they just gotta hold out till then. Beanpole tells them that plans are being made about what to do with the last remaining city. Julius comes shortly after that. He gives a speech. He tells everyone that plans are in motion, that they have been studying the ancient books, and they've figured out how to make flying machines, airplanes. So the plan is that they're going to fly these airplanes over this last city and drop explosives. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out. The tripods send out a signal dismantling the electrical instruments on the airplanes, and they all crash. Very disheartening. But, of course, Julius, being a smart man, he had a backup plan, which Beanpole was working on. Now, if you remember, in the White Mountains, Beanpole told Will he had observed that steam rises, and that he tried to fill a balloon with steam so that he could float away somewhere where there were no tripods. Turns out, he was wrong about the steam, but he was right about the balloon. And they figured out to create a helium balloon. Beanpole had been working on these. The new plan is that they're going to fly these balloons over the last city and drop explosives. They sail across the great ocean to America. They get in these balloons, and it's Will and Henry. They're in a troop of, I think it was like 6 or so. And Will and Henry are in the last 2 balloons. Fritz is in the lead balloon because he's the leader of the troop, so he needs to be in the front. They're flying up to the city, and a tripod that's coming back from its route sees them and starts swatting at them like a man swatting at flies. And he knocks down some. They try to avoid them by dropping ballast, but most of them get knocked out of the sky. Fritz's balloon makes it past the tripod, but his explosives didn't go off when he dropped them. So now it's Will's attempt, and he's able to dodge the tripod. He drops his bomb, but it ricochets off of the dome, and when it explodes, it's not close enough to do any damage. So Henry's the last one. He's their last hope. And Will is observing, as he's already flown over the city and is passed up the city. So he's observing now Henry floating up to the city. But he can tell that Henry's taking a different course of action. He drops his balloon right to the point of the dome where it's almost flattened out and that you could actually walk on it. Gets super close to that part of the dome, gets out of the basket with the explosive. And as soon as he gets out of the basket, the balloon rises from, the weight being off of the balloon now. Will is realizing what he's doing. He's basically sacrificing himself to make sure that that explosive stays on the dome. Will turns, he can't watch. He hears the explosive go off. After a few moments, he turns and the city is utterly destroyed. You can see it's crumbling. Will immediately lands his balloon. So they've won. And it's a couple years later now. We are back in the White Mountains. And there's a conference being held. Will and Beanpole and Fritz are all attending. This conference is about, how are humans going to govern themselves now? They have no masters and they get to choose that for themselves. And at this conference, there's a representative from every land. Some of them want Julius to be the one in charge. Some of them don't. And there's an argument that breaks out among all the delegates. At the end of it, basically, all the people decide, well, we're just going to govern our own land. And then they start arguing with each other, and don't you interfere, we have an army, and blah, blah, blah. Julius is upset. Will looks over at him, and he's got his head in his hands. They leave the conference, and Beanpole says, if Henry were still alive, he was kind of the peacemaker. He could have done something about this situation. This whole time since everything happened, Will's basically been traveling and sailing around the world, having kind of a nice, relaxed life. Beanpole and Fritz decide that, they're going to take up Henry's role from now on for the whole Earth. And they ask Will, are you willing to join us on this next fight, this next adventure where it'll be less exciting? No fanfare. They ask him, will you leave your seas and islands? And Will says, yes, I will leave my seas and islands. And that's the end. I thought it was a very sad ending that, humanity went through all of that. You think they would have learned? I got very upset when I was reading this book. I've read it 3 times now, and I've cried at the end every time. I think just because of everything we're going through, it just kind of affected me. So it makes me feel almost like hopeless. Like I don't want to leave my seas and islands for a species that can't get it together. Anyway, sorry. But it's still a good book. And I still really, really love this series. And I can definitely see me reading it again. Almost done. Just got to top coat this last nail. So yeah, if I were you, I would read these books. My summaries give them no justice. If you really, really want all the details. And it's the language and the style that it's written in is very poetic and just kind of beautiful. So, go get it. Okay, I'm done. I got the flames going. Yeah. If you like this video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up. It's how I decide what kind of videos to make. Make sure and subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you'll know when I upload new videos. And I will see you in the next one.